The dogma of RESTful APIs. When organizations are dogmatic about RESTful APIs, for example, a single endpoint relates to a single entity, they inadvertently push the complexity of coordinating and combining data synchronization to the front end. This then requires complex middle-end systems on the front end to perform all the gnarly bits of data marshaling and synchronization. Why is this a problem? Someone has to write the logic for fetching and combining data. Why not the front end? This is how I rationalize pushing complexity to the front end, but to what effect? Well, the front end naturally becomes more complicated. Who more than anyone else complains about front end complexity? The API developers. You can have your RESTful ideal, but that means you should stop complaining as much about front end complexity. We need complex concurrent paradigms because data synchronization lives in the middle end. Instead of a one-to-one mapping between endpoint and entity, I would like to advocate for a one-to-one mapping between endpoint and page. This is why GraphQL has become so popular, because the front end can query all the different entities it needs in one API request. Having said that, this recommendation is not an ideal, rather, it's just a goal. There's nothing in RESTful design that says this isn't possible. It's merely the mindset that developers have that needs to shift. I've worked on projects that require 10 plus GET requests to render a single page. Most of the time, these requests have dependencies. For example, we're building an email app and we're trying to render the inbox page. So how do we do that? First, we have to fetch all the email accounts. Then for each account ID, we need to fetch the mailboxes. And then for each mailbox ID, we need to fetch the threads. Now you can see how this goes even further, where each thread we need to fetch the message to. But for the sake of simplicity, I just want to demonstrate, this is quite complicated to synchronize on the front end. You have multiple fetch requests. What happens when those fail? There's all these questions about what we have to do when we're making a bunch of requests that depend on other requests. Very complicated, very hard to do on the front end. If we create a one-to-one mapping between endpoint and page, it's one request. Not only do we have the latency of making multiple network requests, but we also have to wait for some requests to finish before making subsequent ones. We also have to handle error states when one of those requests fail. These are non-trivial issues that contribute to complexity. But with the one-to-one mapping between endpoint and page, there is no longer a waterfall effect to making requests. The business logic of data synchronization rests on the API. The front end is much simpler, and we can even optimize the database queries for fetching this data. This is one major reason why I believe GraphQL gained popularity. It was a paradigm shift to move closer to a one-to-one mapping between endpoint and page. When I think about GraphQL, this is what I see as the true benefit, at least from the developer experience. Having a one-to-one mapping between endpoint and page is extremely simple. I just think it's hypercritical to, on one hand, complain about front-end complexity while unintentionally pushing that complexity to it.